Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are, folks. Welcome once again to Full Fat Spoiler Chat. This is a show in which we look at a relatively recent piece of nerdy entertainment, and we talk about all of the good things, the bad things, the themes, the overarching stories, with spoilers, with tons and tons of spoilers. Well, since today is the 5th of November, and since there are certain things going on here in the United States, regarding our government and trying to, in a sense, overthrow it legally and through the electoral system, Manny, who will introduce himself shortly, had this wonderful idea that we swap out what was going to be our topic this week, the movie The Witches. So we'll move that over to next week, with V for Vendetta. Perfect timing. Remember the 5th of November. Well, November. Well, it's 5th of November. Wow. I have a head cold, folks, which is apparently screwing up my lips. The 5th of November right now. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to try really hard not to, incite riots here in the United States, but you never know. So for those people on the chat, and we'll get to you in just a second, before we do that, though, Manny, if you would introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce myself because I realize I haven't done that yet.
Hello, my name is Manny Ortiz. I am the video editor and founder of Nerd Caliber, and I'm also anti-fascist. So I figured that'd be good to say.
Likewise. And since this show is a spoiler chat and it's even less, we are less worried about bad language on this one than we are on our Nerd Week live show on Tuesdays, which we did not have this week because of the election. So I will quote Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys: "Nazi punks, fuck off." And I am Rodney Brown. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber. By the way, deputy editor is just one of the many, many titles. He's our producer and also the founder of Nerd Caliber. So I'm first-person shooter on Facebook as a cosplay photographer, Burley_adopter on the Twitters, and as a tech journalist and some other things. And I notice my mic is pretty low, which is really odd for me. Again, I blame the head cold. So people on the chat: Wolf Girl, hello. Robin Ramirez, hello. And goodbye, apparently. Deadpool, hi, how you doing? Normally this would be the point where I would say, give you a big spoiler warning. I guess if you haven't seen V for Vendetta in the 15 years that it's been out, sure, there's going to be probably some there's going to be a lot of spoilers. Also, if you haven't read the comic book, in the description about where this all comes from, I'll spoil a couple of things because there's some big changes from the comic book to the movie. One of the many reasons Alan Moore does not like it. Then again, Alan Moore doesn't like anything that was ever made of his stuff, and I realize I'm cutting off the top of my head. So there. What is V for Vendetta? It's a movie, came out in 2005, based on a comic book series that initially was published, serialized in a magazine called Warrior in the UK, all the way back in 1982, or starting in 1982. In 1988, DC picked it up and ran it as independent, one-off comic books that ultimately are collected into the large graphic novel V for Vendetta. Written by Alan Moore, illustrated beautifully with like ink painting. So it's black and white, but ink wash painting by David Lloyd. Tells the story of both the movie and the comic book is pretty much the same in this case. Tells the story of a masked vigilante who goes only by the name of V, who is both fighting against the, at this point in this futuristic story, full-on fascist theocracy government that's ruling England, and also seeking vengeance against people that did him bad at a prison camp, concentration camp facility in a place called Larkhill. And he winds up recruiting is kind of a nice way of putting what he does. Um, an assistant, a helper, and ultimately a replacement in the form of this young woman, Evie Hammond. And that's basically the gist of the story. So there were some minor changes. Obviously, they took out a bunch of things to make it fit a 2-hour movie. Alan Moore had this huge subplot about a almost sentient AI computer that the Chancellor used, and ultimately it was discovered that V had hacked it long ago, and it basically drove the Chancellor insane. That whole thing had to come out, and apparently Alan Moore's a little ticked off that the computer was named Fate. So we got a little ticked off that he didn't get to use that heavy-handed metaphor in all of his other heavy-handed metaphors. And the general structure of the story changes near the end. V's death happens about the same way it happens, a little less dramatically in the comic book than in the book, but Evie takes over his role and his costume for a stretch of the last few comics, as opposed to it being implied that she's going to be the next V or the leader of whatever the anarchic government or state or whatever happens afterwards at the end of the movie. And so for reasons like that and others, Alan Moore's disavowed pretty much everything that's ever been made of his work anyway. So,
if I may add a little, another thing that he didn't like was about the philosophy of the film. So we came out in 2005, and during that time, that's when we had President Bush, introduced like the Patriot Act, this idea of surveillance everywhere and losing our privacy. And so when the Wachowskis helped write this movie together, it was pretty much with the mindset of like I guess liberalism versus conservatism, you know. And the thing that Alan Moore really drove him nuts about is that when he wrote the book, Alan Moore, at least from what I remember, he's an anarchist. Believes in the political philosophy of anarchy. So for him, liberalism and anarchy are not the same, which, yeah, he's right, they're not. So he was kind of upset that the Wachowskis took his idea and they used their philosophy to change the whole mode of the story around.
Yeah, I've read that, and I honestly, I kind of disagree. I think that's Alan Moore justifying his hatred of the changes. Okay, we'll get into, I don't want to jump ahead, but we'll get into why I think that's the case later on when we talk about themes and how relevant it is today. But that's a good point, and one that we'll definitely get back to. Sophia, welcome to the show. And yeah, 15 years already. It's been that long that this movie has been out.
Oh, gosh.
And Robin, V for Vendetta is both the graphic novel or comic book and movie that we're talking about. This show is about the movie. But you can't talk about that without talking about what inspired it. So
yeah.
So what we normally do with this is, we talk about what we like and what we didn't like about a particular piece of entertainment that's really timely. This isn't timely, but this still could be an opportunity to talk about something that we've, never really gushed about, what's really cool about this, or, what was a problem, what didn't we like about it. So Manny, what was something that really stood out as something you really liked about the movie?
Definitely Hugo Weaving, and I mean, all the actors were fantastic. Everyone fit their role perfectly. But Hugo Weaving, I mean, it's how hard it is to act or be the voice of someone with a mask on. You can't see too much of their body language, but he was able to, you were able to feel what he's saying to his voice, and I thought the acting was fantastic in it. I can't think of one bad casting this movie at all. I mean, Natalie Portman, she did a great job. Everyone that was in this role, I just they felt like they were not the actor, they were these characters.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think as much as I love him as an actor, I think John Hurt might have gone a little overboard with the scenery chewing as Chancellor Sutler. And by the way, among the few things about the details of the movie that were changed, that was a big change because in the graphic novel, his name is Adam Susan.
Hmm.
And I would not be able to take seriously a Hitler-like, racist demagogue autocrat named Chancellor Susan. I'm just sorry. Making his name actually something that is
That's
both
right.
British and approximates Hitler was a
Yeah.
smart move. Yeah. Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I think that's Hugo Weaving and overall the pretty stylistic direction of this is directed by James McTeague, who was a second unit director on a bunch of the Matrix movies. This was his first big movie, and you can see in that what he brought to what was the second reasonably well-known flick?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
Ninja Assassin.
Ninja Assassin. That's the one. Yeah. You can see that sort of stylish element, that started in this movie and just sort of like broke all out in Ninja Assassin. And that's everything else about it is pretty good. It's a fairly tight story.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I thought the directing was excellent. So this movie, if you think about it, doesn't have a lot of action scenes per se, you know. But I didn't feel that loss. I mean, he was able to do like the dramatic points. A lot of the discussions that we're having and the debates and the storytelling that the characters were giving. It was so intense that I didn't realize it till much afterwards. That I was like, oh wow, there's only like maybe 2 or 3 fight scenes
yep.
throughout the whole thing. I thought it did a good job making it feel intense.
Yeah. And I think two things are needed for something like that to happen. You need one, an excellent script. Well, three things: an excellent script, a good director, and a lead that can carry, exposition and relatively silent, moments and deep emotional moments and so on. And Hugo Weaving was absolutely that. I think the best example of that I've ever seen is Spielberg's Lincoln.
Mm.
Because when you think about it, it's the story of a president trying to lobby Congress to pass a law. That's literally the plot of the story. That's what starts it, and that's what the big successful victory at the end is. And it happens to take place in the Civil War, and there's all of that around it. But it is, it's Abraham Lincoln talking to people about trying to get this done and telling stories that ultimately lead to them understanding why he wants to get what he wants done. And that's it. And it is I think it's 2.5 hour movie or something like that just zips right by. And I think McTeague did a really good job, and Hugo Weaving, all the credit to him, did a good job of doing that. That's a good point. So I don't know if I have anything about this that I particularly dislike. While I'm trying to come up with something, is there anything that you can point out that was off the mark for you?
I was thinking of that before we started to do this. I have a hard time thinking the negatives. I enjoyed this movie a lot. I always watch it every year in November. Sometimes I miss a day or two of the fifth, sometimes the fourth or the sixth, depending on the circumstance. But this is, I don't know. I don't want to call it a perfect movie. It's not that, but it's something about it that's really enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's like watching a good play. Let me see. I'm trying to think of. I like the music was good. The soundtrack, the music that they use for the movie, I found no flaws with that. Nothing felt out of place. The action and the special effects were superb. The it didn't feel too long or too short. The movie, I mean, even when it went back to the backstory of V and how he became who he was and what he had to do, I didn't feel that was long or drawn out. You know, the symbols in the movie, like dominoes in your background. Um, uh, I I don't know. I can't. I I I mean, even after 15 years later, it's I think this is gonna sound strange. I don't want to go too far ahead and to talk about the philosophy so much of the movie, but it's I think the fact that it the themes that dealt with this movie is much stronger, much resonates more with people than I think the book did. Because honestly, there's not too many people nowadays. I don't think anyone that I know, except for maybe one or two that I maybe met at a convention like here and there, believes in the philosophy of anarchy. But people do want change, and people hate fascism. At least
Or
um,
they should.
they should. Yeah. So something about that is just timeless. This idea of like fighting to make things right. You know, it's funny when this movie came out. I remember talking to conservatives about it, and they loved the movie. You know, they weren't offended by it at all because again, it's dealing with fascists, and it's sort of sad nowadays that um, I think if that movie were to come out now, I could picture some conservatives that I've seen that would be offended by it. They were thinking like, oh, they're talking that why they bring politics into this movie and all that
Because it's a
junk.
movie about politics.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, it's pretty easy to make a comparison between Sutler and Trump,
yeah,
or at least what Trump wants to be. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that there are, people who, conservatives, particularly ones who are very supportive of Trump, as opposed to the real conservatives who are not, would actually absolutely hate this. Would say like, oh my God, it's just so obviously Trump. Well, it came out 15 years ago. You know, long before he even thought about running for president.
yeah.
So
And the book came out what in the late '80s, if I remember correctly.
early '80s initially. It was initially published in that Warrior magazine in starting in '82.
Hmm.
So it was a little bit about Thatcher's England, but you know this the North Fire Party, the party that Sutler runs and is this sort of hate-filled, anti-immigrant, anti-gay, anti-everything analog for basically Nazi Germany, is way beyond anything that anybody ever accused the Thatcher regime of. So, I don't think it was even in the '80s was sort of an analog for Thatcher's regime or Reagan's. Although Moore has made it very clear that the comic book and the graphic novels were all about England, all about Britain. And it didn't refer to any other country whatsoever. But I think if I had, so there are two things that I think were not done as well as they could have been done. The first is the scene where Gordon Dietrich's final show takes place, and they do that sort of Benny Hill like silly skit about the Chancellor Sutler. First off, and I think this would probably be one of the things where Moore would, his complaint would be right. It really does read like an American person's interpretation of slapstick British humor. I mean, it doesn't really read like a Benny Hill skit or any of the, like we were talking earlier, Fry and Laurie or Laurie and Fry, whoever got top billing on that show, or certainly Monty Python or anything like that. I mean, it wasn't that kind of. It wasn't even Benny Hill, and it went on too long. It was just, if you make your point about how silly what he's doing, and then obviously the government has a horrible reaction to it, and he gets kidnapped. The Fingermen get him.
I wonder if the chancellor went to the hospital after breaking that glass of milk. Because first of all, that takes a lot of strength, and second, I would I assume his hands all cut up from that. But that's
That's true. Yeah.
tiny point, tiny point.
And certainly John Hurt does not look like he could crush a glass of milk. Um, so the other thing I think was a bit of a problem is that I think because they decided to somewhat change the ending, because they didn't want it to be a movie so much about anarchy, that the ending to me is a little clumsy.
Hmm.
I get what McTeague was trying to do with the representation of the various people that have died, and they are now all sort of spiritually informing the group of people that are, standing out in front of, the remnants of Parliament, and okay, we're going to make changes. But it just there. I think there could have been a better way of making that sort of resolution than just a crowd scene with a bunch of dead people popping up in it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely Danny's very idealistic. Where now in reality that would happen, something like that, I don't know. Usually, uh, when you empty out a power structure, another one is quickly established. So it's I see that, like I mean, I think as a movie, it's good at the end, you feel good about it, and, the good guys won and you leave the theater happy. But realistically, I don't know.
Just a second here. I'm typing the name of the movie into the chat at a chatter's request. V for Vendetta. There you go, Robin. Emily, welcome to the show. Normally we throw in really heavy spoiler warnings whenever anybody joins, but this is for a movie that's 15 years old. Honestly, if you haven't seen it, I guess if you don't want to be spoiled, but it's 15 years old.
Yeah,
So,
if you haven't seen this movie yet, go, stop watching us. Go, let's see, where is it at now? I'm not sure where you can stream it, but I know you can rent it at Amazon Prime right now if you want to watch it.
if we had put up the post earlier, I could have told you where, at least locally to me here, it's playing. Apparently, an awful lot of theater chains play this at least twice on November 5th every year. So you could actually go see it in the big screen.
That's funny. I saw an ad for that for like in France. I didn't realize it was here in the States.
I didn't either until I looked up. I can't remember what it was, but something about the movie, and just based on the title, Google gave me all of the local theater times. And I'm like, really? Like, oh, okay, wow. So
Shows you the enduring power of this movie.
yes, and the fact that it gives people something to show that's a little bit different than whatever currently is playing. Well, right now it's nothing or almost nothing. On a particular day, on the 5th of November. So, all right. So let's talk about the philosophy, about the themes. And since I don't think at this point there's any way of separating that from what it might be, or how applicable it might be to what's going on today in the United States, then that's going to be part of the whole discussion too. So you talked a little bit about the difference of the philosophy between anarchy and liberalism, about the way the Wachowskis wrote it, and how Alan Moore wrote the graphic novel. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's a difference between the graphic novel and the movie. I'm not necessarily sure that it was so much a liberal versus conservative. They very much kept the idea this was a fascist government. There's no question about that. And certainly way more fascist than Bush's government was. So, I mean, 9/11, a couple of days later, George W. Bush, who not a whole lot of people could have given credit for a whole lot of, sensitive or empathetic things, came right out and said, "Hey, look, this isn't a war against Islam. This is a war against the people who bombed, our towers. That's not the same thing, and don't make that, connection." So, and also, oddly enough, he was also pretty understanding of Mexican immigrants. He spoke Spanish, being from Texas.
Well, it's his nephew, I believe, is half Mexican.
Yes. Yeah, he's got so. And this is not a defense of George W. Bush. He did a lot of really awful things, not the least of which was lying about uranium existing to justify, bombing the crap out of Iraq. But the movie wasn't so much that an obvious liberal versus conservative, Clinton versus Bush kind of thing. It was still a horrifically fascist government. Sutler's government was as fascist as it was in the comic book. And they made it abundantly clear, in the letter that Evie found from Valerie, that V found and then planted for Evie to find, in prison. She was executed for being a lesbian. It was, as horrific as Nazi Germany, if not worse. The difference is that Moore's solution in the comic book was anarchy, and V, while he paid lip service a little bit to anarchic ideas, clearly he was not an anarchist. In the movie, V was a guy out for vengeance, V for Vendetta, and he was in the comic book, but he was also doing that to eventually create an anarchist state in the UK. That wasn't the case in the movie. Aside from him paying lip service, he just needed that government to go away. Didn't particularly care what replaced it. Whereas in the comic, he is very much about replacing it with anarchy. And Moore ends the comic with basically a view of London from the standpoint of Finch, the inspector. That implies that, maybe this wasn't the best idea. So even an anarchist like Moore leaves it up to you to decide whether, okay, what this completely blacked out people rioting in the streets anarchy is like, is that much better than the horrific fascist government that was just overthrown?
I wonder, is because, so from what I understand, he was writing these parts of V for Vendetta during the early 80s. Then Warrior got canceled. And I believe there was a deal made with DC. I forgot why. I think it was for Watchmen or something like that, that in return for him doing this, they would help him complete V for Vendetta. So he wrote the last two parts, I believe, that need to be done like at least 5 years afterwards, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And I wonder, maybe as he was writing it, he was kind of thinking, it's like, am I like kind of like not doubting himself, but kind of like maybe just kind of say, hey, listen, I this is my best solution, my idea of the best solution right now, but I don't know if it's the perfect solution.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure how deep he was into the idea that anarchy was the right thing. He describes it as a parody. So I'm thinking what he's parodying is the idea that, there can be a perfect solution to, to eliminating fascism, or that anarchy could be a perfect, the right kind of state, or stateless state, I guess, because it's anarchy. So, and that's part of the problem. I think the comic book is muddled a bit in what its philosophy and what it's trying to present, unless you read it as a, this is clearly awful, but this ain't much better, kind of ending. And the movie just pays lip service to that. It's, it ends with that scene of everybody standing out in front of, the ruins of Parliament, with the implication that there's going to be a big change and that, fascism is going to be overthrown, but it doesn't state how or what at all. And so therefore it becomes just a movie about vengeance. It is a movie about this guy seeking vengeance for what was done to him.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's one of the big differences. Robin, it plays on Tubi. Thank you.
Cool. And Tubi's free right now.
Awesome. So you can see it for free, folks, and you should, because I agree with Manny 100%. It's worth watching, absolutely. And I just reduced my window there, so I can't see what we're doing. Okay. So So, what do you think about how the philosophy of the movie, such as that it is, applies to what's going on today?
Oof, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Well, you mean like the whole philosophy, not just the ending of it. I think just people that are watching it now. I mean, it's so many uh, similarities I feel with this government, at least what it's trying to do to what Stellar has accomplished. I mean, there's just so many, I mean, parallels too. We have COVID dealing with now, and they had a virus outbreak in the movie. The idea of kicking immigrants out, that's obviously what's happening here. Um, there's just a lot of parallels. There's a lot of parallels, and I think people that are frustrated with our government right now could relate to the movie very well. You know, it's one of those few things that was made 15 years ago and has aged well right now.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the things that people might miss about the message of the movie is that, and the graphic novel, is that Norse Fire is a political party. Granted, it was a political party that rose up in the chaos of an awful lot of things around both the nuclear war, which is way less important in the movie than it is in the comic book, and this this viral catastrophe. But it still was a political party, and so people voted for it. They didn't take over the UK government by force. They were elected because they snowed enough people into thinking that that was what was needed to keep Britain safe.
You know, and that sort of relates to, at least in the movie, more so to what was going on during that time in 2005. People were re-electing Bush because they were afraid of what happened in 9/11, you
Yeah.
know, and they didn't want the terrorists to make a new plan to come back. And if I remember correctly, there was this big thing where in during the election that, what was it called? Like, you don't stop a horse running halfway, something weird saying like that. I kept hearing over and over from the Republicans at that time, like, you don't stop a horse midstream, something weird like that.
Yeah.
But you know,
Yeah.
but meaning, like, you know, don't they're trying to stop terrorism, don't stop them halfway. Who knows what the new administration is going to do? They don't know what they're doing, you know.
Right.
We're on the job. So that you know, and that fear drove people to vote for Bush again. um so I that at the time when the movie came out, I just reflected that, what was going on during that time. Nowadays, not so much. I think, I mean, right now America's pretty much split in the middle when it comes to what's going on with this government. Either you're for it or against it. Either you're racist or you're not. um, um, so it's not. I don't think that's the same, but I can understand why that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that may be the case, except that in the graphic novel, it's the same thing, and they
Hmm.
just basically take that idea right from the graphic novel. So they didn't need to make it anything different to reflect the times. It was just timely. You know, it just worked out that way, that it was particularly timely, that it came out at a time when the Bush reelection campaign had just finished, and Bush had just been reelected. And, I don't. So I don't think Moore's criticism, to get back to something we said early on, is particularly apt in this case. I think he is kind of just whining about the changes that were made to his work, and it isn't a story about U.S. liberalism versus U.S. conservatism. It just happened to come out at a time when it looked like that story.
Yeah. Well, the thing with Alan Moore, and again, I don't want to downplay his issues with DC Comics.
Yes.
I don't want to make sure I say that, but he's angry.
Yeah.
He's very angry. This was that time also when League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, he was part of that lawsuit, even though uh, that the movie and his work and his comic book work were very different things, just had the same name and
Right.
maybe some characters here and there.
Well,
That
they
we
had
see.
many of the same characters and sort of the same concept of, you know, characters from literature actually being alive and getting together and working together.
Yeah, but Alan Moore at that point, I think was just angry. So I don't know. It's like I hear what he's saying, and but you could tell that that's also that anger he still has with DC,
Yeah.
to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there is no question. You know, he absolutely didn't want anything to do with the After Watchmen stuff that DC published, and then he didn't want anything to do with HBO's Watchmen sequel.
Yeah. Was it Watchmen or was it V for Vendetta where one of the producers lied and said like, oh, Joe Silver, that he lied that, oh yeah, Alan Moore gave us permission to do this movie. Like he gives us his blessing on it, and Alan Moore said, no, I did not. I forgot, there was something like that that happened, and then he just got really upset about it.
I'm guessing it was probably Watchmen, but I don't know for sure. I vaguely remember hearing that story. Robin, I did watch this years ago. Yeah, it's good. Awesome. So we're not spoiling anything for you. Hopefully we're reminding you of some stuff. Go
watch it again.
Yeah, or go watch it again because it's worth it. I think that it is sort of timely right now, and that the philosophy... So it gets more... it seems like it's more prescient, that it has the ability to predict the future. The further and further the conservative arm in the United States moves towards what is essentially a fascist autocratic government. And, you know, there is zero question whatsoever that Trump wishes he was an autocrat. He has publicly made requests that he be allowed to serve an anti-constitutional third term. He believes 100% in the idea that, which unfortunately his Attorney General Bill Barr is one of the chief proponents of, that there is, I think what they call it, unitary authority, that the president has complete authority over the executive branch, absolute, indisputable authority over anything that touches the executive branch, and cannot be prosecuted for anything that he does while he's in hold of that authority. That's a king, folks. That's not a president. That's not any ruler of any elected democratic government that I've ever heard of. That's Trump. Trump, coddles Kim Jong-un. He either worships or is in the pocket of Putin, or both. He wants to be a dictator. 100%. And again, this is his own words. This isn't anything I'm making up or anything that, any liberal side, liberal mouthpiece, liberal media, whatever says. It's on videotape, right there for everybody to see and to hear. So as the Republican majority with this autocratic wannabe leader as president is emboldened to do the things that they have been wanting to do, and I mean the extreme right wing of the Republican Party, which is essentially the Republican Party these days, like restrict, overturn Roe v. Wade, restrict abortion rights, close off borders and restrict immigration, establish religious rights that violate other rights that have been established by the government, and in some cases by amendment, constitutional amendment. They want this country to be their Christian country, and not the country of the laws that were established that explicitly said you cannot have a state involved in a church. You cannot have the federal government involved in any way, shape, or form in any religion. It can't happen. And everybody's interpreted that as a two-way street. You can't have a state religion, but you also can't have religions influencing state laws. State as in this case, the federal government. So in that case, Sutler's Norse Fire Party led UK is almost the wet dream of Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, and certainly Donald Trump's advisor Stephen Miller, who, folks, is well, anyway, look up all of the things Stephen Miller has said and done. That man is probably the most horrific racist that has had this level of power, I don't know, maybe since the early 20th century. Although Nixon was a little, and Reagan was certainly, as it turns out, a racist, we found out. But anyway, so I think that the movie, when it was made, was more of a warning about how this thing could happen, how a Nazi Germany-esque government could come about in an otherwise democratic country. You remember, Hitler rose up in the Weimar Republic. It was a fully democratic republic elected country. And nowadays, it's way, way more disturbingly timely, I think, given what's going on right now, where we've got a president that is literally trying to stop the constitutionally determined way elections happen in this country, to try to stay in power for one more term. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you that, first of all, I agree with you with everything you said. But to the context of V for Vendetta, definitely. It's definitely a warning. And I do want to say that, in 2005, when this came out, America was not like Stetler's, regime. But it's a warning. And it's kind of, what makes me upset about today's age is that we have, not just V for Vendetta, it's been science fiction that has been warning about these type of people in control of power. History, if you look back in history, also warns you what happens when people like this take control of power. And again, it's frustrating that 50% of this people in this country are just don't see that. I mean, we have this, that we have access to a whole bunch of written material. There's so much that we can just begin to study on that we never ever accessed before. I remember as a kid, someone having an encyclopedia, like the whole thing was momentous. I would have loved to just read everything, and now we don't have. I have this, but I mean, you can see it phone, but if we don't research it, or we just research things that just validates our opinion, which is not really researching at all. You're just patting yourself on the back. It's frustrating, and I'm glad there's movies like V for Vendetta out there that show, talk about the problem. And I just wish maybe more people would not just see it, would just definitely see it, but then also maybe think about it.
Now, I think here's one of the things where I think Moore is right in that it was sort of an Americanization of part of his story. So in the graphic novel, all of the different departments of the government are described as a body part. So the surveillance are the eyes, the cops are, or the investigators are the nose, the strong men, the secret police are the fingers, and the mouth is the propaganda machine. And in the movie, they turned that into BTN, the official government-sponsored, government-run arm, broadcast arm, that is the only thing that's allowed to be shown. That is clearly Fox. And if they were making it more British, it would have been Murdoch's empire in the UK, which was newspapers. Murdoch owned or tried to buy television networks, like he had Fox in the United States, or like Fox was in the United States. It's not a Murdoch property, and that he wasn't allowed to. He wound up buying a number of stations, but he ultimately couldn't, put that together into. He wanted to buy Sky Media, and basically turn it into a British type of Fox. And Christian, welcome to the show, and thank you for loving our channel. We love that you love our channel. So that adaptation of turning the mouth and its propaganda machine in general into essentially Fox News, that was definitely an Americanization, but it was a timely one. When you think about it, a story that started in 1982 and basically was wrapped up in the late 80s. It's not the same thing to talk about a general propaganda machine that involves newspapers a lot, when in 2005 already social media was pretty much where most people, or cable television news was where most people was getting their news. So I understand that was in my mind an appropriate update, but I also see why Alan Moore could bitch a little bit about that. But that, I think, is probably one of the most also telling bits about this, is that without going into the tool set of the fascist regime, he actually had it as a vital part of the whole comic and then the movie. Control of information. And that involves lying. It involves lying on a daily basis to people, to the point where they accept the lie, and so they will then accept any lie that particular piece of or that vendor of information will give them. And that has been the Fox strategy from the moment it was started. And that has just accelerated up to fascist levels of political and information control in the Trump administration. The idea that literally they had to invent this ridiculous concept called the deep state to continue denying the fact that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, because literally every domestic investigative agency said it was true. Foreign investigative agencies from foreign governments that were allies of ours said it was true. And so because there is no way you could possibly deny it, you have to come up with this thing called the deep state and say, nope, okay, so there's this deep conspiracy inside our own government to try to, to try to take me down and, make up all these lies. And it was right there in the movie. Again, the closer we get, to, God forbid, a second term for Trump, the more prescient that movie seems 15 years on. So we're running close to 50 minutes here, and I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to rant. And I kind of don't want to do that. I think it's abundantly clear where I stand on any U.S. political issue. Certainly is for Manny. So it's not like that's going to be any news for anybody, but I don't need to sit here and rant about it. Ideally, that's not what you come to these channels or this channel for. You come to nerdy entertainment. So consider this our personal indulgence on the 5th of November. Yes, we remembered the gunpowder treason and plot, and how it applies to the situation here in the United States right now.
And to be honest, if you've seen V for Vendetta and you're just watching this right now and you're shocked that we're talking about politics on a movie that's all about politics, shame on you. Yeah. You should have known better.
Pay more attention. Next time you watch it, don't watch it while you're working on your cosplay or feeding the dog or whatever. But that said, I think it's time to wrap this up before we start really, foaming at the mouth, or I do anyway. So thank you everybody for joining us in the chat. Thank you for the questions. Hopefully we answered some of those that were up in there. Next week, I'm pretty sure we're going to go back to doing the witches.
Yes.
It'll still be pretty timely. And we will be next Tuesday back with Nerd Week Live. We've got 2 weeks at that point of news to cover because we didn't have it this last Tuesday. So definitely tune in for that if you want to get our takes on all sorts of nerd news that happened in these past 2 weeks. Manny, if you would, talk yourself out.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching. This is Manny, and this is Rodney with Nerd Big Fat. Oh, sorry, Big Fat Spoiler.
All of that's accurate. Full fat spoiler chat.
Yes.
But all of the other things too. So thank you, folks, and we will see you next week. Fingers crossed. I was going to say for the best outcome for the election, but fingers crossed for Biden.
All right. Watch out there.
Yep. And be safe. Be careful. Depending on what happens, and I couldn't say being around any government facility in any contested state in the next couple of weeks is going to be a particularly safe thing. So those of you in those open carry states where the yahoos like to ride around in their trucks and force political buses off the road, be careful. So good night. Stay safe. Wear a mask. 100,000 in one day. So new record, folks.
Yay.
Yeah. So wear your mask, wash your hands, social distance, and